Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Fetish by Anonymous. Narrated by Ashford Macnab. A neighbouring hand. A neighbouring hand will open your mind to new and scintillating ways to keep a marriage fun and exciting. However, the story includes discussion of adultery, so those who may be sensitive to this, please take note. Also, please be aware that oil breaks down rubber-based condoms, diaphragms, and cervical caps, but oil was the most commonly used lubricant at the time, and so, for historical accuracy, that is what is used here. Chapter 1. June 1878. Paris. "Ma chérie!" a woman's voice called out. Camelia Zimmerfield suffered a full-bodied jolt of alarm as she recognized Suzette Bilot. She wore trousers. Not bloomers, but men's striped trousers, with a crease. They were topped by a tweed jacket over a shirt and waistcoat. Her red hair was all but hidden beneath a grey driving cap. Her pointed chin and laughing brown eyes were exactly as Camelia remembered, though, and that wide smile provoked a rush of fierce nostalgia. "Suzette!" They embraced and kissed each other's cheeks. Camelia was thrown back to a more carefree, sensual time as she drank in floral perfume masking cigarette smoke and the salty wooden scent of ink and damp paper from the print shop Suzette's family owned. "I was expecting someone in a gown," Camelia said breathily, still recovering from her shock. "They didn't want to let me in." Suzette glanced back at the gate. "I had to show them my documentation that I'm allowed to wear men's clothes. I ride a bicycle, and these are less dangerous when I work around the press, so the police allow it." "Mais bien sûr." Camelia felt foolish for agonizing over what to wear. 10 years ago, Suzette had been her most trusted guide on all fronts: manners, men, fashion, and philosophy. Suzette's family were printers and bookbinders, creating plates for top fashion houses as well as political texts for universities. She'd been well read even before her parents had scrimped every centime to board her at Madame Isolt's Académie des Filles pour les Sciences Domestiques et la Grâce Sociale. Their hope had been that their daughter's social connections would improve their ties to wealthy customers. Camelia's parents, an industrialist and the daughter of a general, had also sought social elevation through their daughter's education. Their aspiration was achieved when Camelia married Powell, the son of a senator. Now, Camelia moved effortlessly amongst the highest circles in New York and Washington, but she couldn't come to Paris and not see her amie spéciale, even if she lived an unconventional life. "You look beautiful," Suzette said, studying her, "exactly as I remember." "I was sure whatever gown I had made in New York would be outdated by the time I arrived." Camelia self-consciously brushed at her matching set in prune satin. Bronze roses decorated the jacket, and her skirt was layered in zigzagged flounces of knife-edged pleats. She'd even had her maid add a waterfall of hair to her own curls to mirror the intricacy of her small bustle and train. Her hat was pinned at the latest cockeyed angle. Camelia was as well turned out as any woman at the Exposition Universelle, but next to Suzette's plain, masculine attire, she felt like a royal wedding cake. "Where is your husband, chérie?" Suzette glanced around. "Have you run away from marriage, as I have?" "Oh, I wasn't sure if you were teasing me in your letter. Is it true?" she asked with concern. Oui. Suzette spoke with a distinct lack of regret. He was angry that I wore my cap. No, the other kind, she said, as Camellia flicked her attention to the top of Suzette's head. You know of these? She blinked inquiringly. The rubber preventative? You mean... Was Suzette really speaking of contraceptives, here on the promenade of the exposition? Camellia glanced uneasily at the visitors streaming toward them from the gate, but as outrageous as Suzette's behaviour was, this was precisely why Camellia had always admired her. Suzette said exactly what she thought. Even so, she urged her toward a quiet path so they were less likely to be overheard. To think, I was worried we wouldn't have our old rapport, she said wryly. Pas, Suzette dismissed with a wave. Women should be allowed to speak of useful things. We shouldn't be censured for choosing when or if to have children either. Camellia smiled half-heartedly. She hadn't chosen, so much as accepted, that birthing children was her purpose in marrying Powell. She didn't regret her babies, but if she had known how profoundly she would be changed by motherhood, she might have waited to become one. It must have been difficult to leave them at home, Suzette noted politely. They're with my mother and several nannies who dote on them. I'm sure they don't miss me. Camellia missed them, though, greatly. But her goal on this trip was to rediscover the woman she had been before she'd lost herself in the role of wife and mother. I've missed you, ma chérie. Tell me more about the life you lead now. She looped her arm through Suzette's as they continued to walk. You won't divorce, will you? She didn't dare tell Suzette there was a voracious appetite at home for booklets describing those court proceedings in lurid detail. When France reinstitutes divorce? Oui. I'm working with the Women's Rights Society to advocate for it. That is another reason I left him. He didn't like that I contribute articles to their journal. Now I edit and print them. She smirked. I take the utmost satisfaction in arming women with their own power. What of your marriage? Are you happy? I am. Mostly. A heaviness came into the arm Camellia had linked through Suzette's. It felt terrifying to let her mask slip, but with Suzette, she couldn't help it. My life is so busy I don't have time to question how I feel. Oh, where are we going? Camellia paused to get her bearings. Suzette shaded her eyes to take in the grounds. Powell is in the machinery hall, Camellia said of her husband, but I wondered if you would accompany me to the head of the Statue of Liberty. She pointed along the gravelled avenue to where the points of the crown were visible above the screen of a leafy tree. I climbed to the platform on the torch at the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia 2 years ago. Yes, let's see whether a woman's head is truly as empty as we're led to believe. On the contrary, I'm told we can see how man has constructed her. Try telling me that isn't symbolic. They continued walking, both laughing. Powell Zimmerfield had worried his wife would be a distraction if she came with him to Paris, and she was, even when she wasn't with him. Because she wasn't with him. The grounds of the exhibition ought to be free of reprobates who might accost her, and she'd reminded him more than once that she had lived here for 4 years, but her boarding school had been a sort of convent life in which she had learned to be the charming hostess and doting mother that she was. It was his place to shelter her from the harsh realities of life, and he took that role seriously. He adored her. She had slipped away to meet her old friend, though. Suzette had been mentioned occasionally through the years, always fondly. A few months ago, she'd written to advise Camellia of the first International Congress of Women's Rights to be held in conjunction with this World's Fair. Camellia had insisted on coming to Paris with him so she could attend with her friend. Powell hadn't been sure what to expect from this trip, but much to his delight, being away from the children seemed to make her more receptive to love-making. This morning, she had even wriggled her ass into his lap when they woke and asked if he couldn't stay in bed a little longer. The memory of lazily pumping into the wet furnace of her pussy had kept a smug smile on his face all morning. It also made him a shade possessive. He missed her and kept his eye out for her as he demonstrated his screw-cutting lathe. There she was. Wait, was she with a man? Who the hell was that? Powell, darling. Camellia seemed oblivious to the people giving them second looks. Please meet my dearest intime Suzette. Suzette's gaze bounced off the hulking machine behind him and the banner that read Zimmerfield Milling and Lathes, then swept over Powell's dark suit and bowler hat, down to the watch chain that dangled off his pale grey waistcoat, then back up to his black moustache and mutton chop beard. He wore it styled in a curving line from his upper lip down to his jawline and up to his sideburn, leaving his chin bare. She had the manner of a man in more than her clothing. She studied the machinery and him with equal directness, as if she understood how both worked with one glance. You found each other. Excellent. He accepted the kid-gloved hand Suzette offered, thinking her very different from the way she'd been described. It's a pleasure to meet you, monsieur. The pleasure is mine. He hoped that was true. She seemed charming, but the vaguest prickle of threat dug like iron filings under his skin. He suspected he was jealous of the smile she'd put on his wife's face. He wanted to be the one to make Cammy look so vivacious and pleased. How long had it been since he had? That was a disturbing question. Are you ready to take us to lunch, darling? Camellia asked. He grimaced with regret. I thought you would be tied up at least another hour. I'd like to continue my discussions with these gentlemen from Denmark. The men in question were out of earshot, but he nodded at them to let them know he would only be a moment. Of course. Powell is here to make contacts, Camellia explained to Suzette. We're booked to visit factories in Italy and Belgium to see what agreements can be negotiated. You'll be back in Paris for the Congress, though? Suzette asked. Oh, yes, Camellia nodded. We have an apartment in the Place Vendôme until the end of July, and will come and go from there. Could we invite Suzette to join us for dinner later in the week, darling, before we leave for Italy? Of course, Powell said politely. I'd like to visit properly. As would I, Suzette assured him, but he had the vague sense her interest in any man was minimal. Why don't you and I go back to our apartment now? Camellia suggested to Suzette. We can catch up over a private lunch. That word, private, and Suzette's warm, I would love that, conjured an erotic vision of the two women entwined on a bed, clothing in disarray. Their mouths would cling, and a pair of fingers would be buried in a slit. Their duet of moans would fill air laden with the fragrance of juicy cunt. His cock twitched even as he scolded himself. His straight-laced wife would never conceive of making love with a woman. She was still reserved while making love with her husband of 10 years. Not that Powell wanted her to take a lover, female or otherwise. He had no interest in others himself. The vision was an idle entertainment. Nothing more. But he did wish the promising spark of their earliest days had turned into the bonfire of passion he had once anticipated. Instead, it was a cozy fire, and would have to stay that way. He would never shock her with his prurient inner wants. It was, after all, his role to protect her. He always would, because he loved her. The women departed, and he turned back to his business. Chapter 2. "Would you prefer coffee or lemonade with lunch?" Camellia asked as she led Suzette into their suite. "Dare I suggest wine?" Suzette craned her neck at the high ceilings, the massive mirror over the fireplace, the silk rugs and the gold-trimmed velvet drapes that framed the double doors onto the balcony. Suzette continued to have the most terribly wonderful, or wonderfully terrible, effect upon Camellia. She used her rusty French to request the maid fetch cold chicken, bread, olives, and chilled vin blanc. "Be honest," Suzette said as the young woman left. "Did you suggest we eat here because of the way I'm dressed?" She removed her cap to reveal her cropped hair. "No, because of the way I am. You look so comfortable, and I feel like a Thanksgiving turkey. Although I sent the maid away before I asked her to help me change. That's annoying." She paused in removing her hat, wondering if she should call her back. "I'll help you. You wouldn't mind?" That would be a tremendous intimacy, and an imposition. They weren't schoolgirls any longer. She didn't wish her friend to feel like hired help. On the other hand, there had been a time when they had been very comfortable with intimacy, very close. Camellia experienced a pang of yearning for that simpler, naive yet hopeful time, for those uncomplicated pleasures. "Show me," Suzette urged. Flustered, Camellia set aside her hat and led her through. "Mon Dieu, I've always wondered what these rooms looked like inside," Suzette murmured as they entered the elegant bedchamber with the massive bed, fireplace, and the sunlight glowing through the translucent curtains covering more pairs of doors. "Is your home in America like this?" "It's very showy," Camellia admitted. "My in-laws built it, but they spend their time in Washington and Boston." If that sounded as though she and Powell lived rent-free, she would quickly disabuse Suzette of that notion. Her obligation to her husband's family was incessant. "I don't dress this formally every day. I wanted you to be impressed," she admitted, as she began to release the cloth-covered buttons down the front of her jacket, self-conscious, yet not. It had always been easier to reveal herself to Suzette than hide anything. "Why would you care what I think of you?" Suzette came to tug a closely tailored sleeve down her arm. Her touch was exactly as it had always been, confident but gentle, innately tender and reassuring, while making the slightest brush of a knuckle against Camelia's skin feel as though she caressed her with a downy feather. "I've always cared what you thought," Camellia said over her shoulder as she turned to offer her other sleeve. "How could you not know that?" "Shall I be worried what you think of me, then?" Suzette shook out the jacket, then folded it over the arm of the nearby chair. Her gaze sparkled with amusement. "You've always been too self-possessed to care what anyone thinks," Camellia scoffed. "That's why I adore you and put so much stock in your opinion. I'm too quick to do as I'm told." She opened the buttons on her skirt. I let myself believe that deciding what color to wear is the same as having control over what I wear. Or how much, Suzette teased as she kept the skirt from crumpling to the floor while Camellia stepped out of it, still wearing both overskirt and underskirt. 10 years ago, they had helped each other undress for more than a simple wardrobe change. Memories of their most precocious activities teased Camellia as her gaze flickered over the fit of Suzette's trousers across her backside. Her friend bent to drape the skirt on the foot of the bed, then turned. The swells of her breasts were almost impossible to see beneath the billow of her tucked shirt, but her belted waist was undeniably feminine. Suzette noticed where her attention had strayed. She lifted her brow, her amusement turned to something more languid and questioning. "Do you wear gowns at all anymore?" It was cowardly to pretend her clothing was all she was interested in, but Suzette didn't challenge her. Only for occasions. She accepted each skirt as Camellia handed them off. Her cheeks were stinging, but Camellia unbuckled the belt of her wireless bustle and dropped it onto the seat of the chair, finally able to pull her camisole over her head and get to the hidden hook and eye closures down the front of her corset. "That's pretty." Suzette set aside the skirts and made her pause as she splayed her hands on the royal blue silk, cinching Camelia's waist. Embroidered silver-green vines embellished it, along with ice-blue lace trimmings. It cost a fortune. Her insides seemed to feel all those vines, reaching and twirling into hidden spaces as Suzette's hands stayed on her waist. Her breasts swelled against the stricture of the cups. "I feel as though I'm being sawn in half when I wear it, but I wanted a second honeymoon. It's distressing to be away from the children, but things between Powell and I—" "Not good?" Suzette asked with a small frown. "Not bad, just fading with age." She tried to make a joke of it, except standing close to Suzette this way, with her friend's lips right there, beckoning, Camellia experienced a surge of youthful risk and excitement for possibility. What a wayward thought! They were married women of 28. Suzette might not have children, but Camellia had 3. Her amorous needs were met, and she had ceased pining for Suzette years ago. Disconcerted, she stepped away and began to release the hooks down the front of her corset. "I haven't felt sexy or even in control of my own body for a long time. Or not in control of it," she added with a husky laugh. "I don't suppose that makes sense." "Of course it does. You want passion, the sort that overtakes you completely." "Yes." Camellia heard the pang in her own voice, and a sting of emotion arrived in her throat at being so well understood. She peeled away the corset, sighing in relief. Now, she was in her chemise and drawers, both damp with perspiration. She shivered, and her nipples peaked against the muslin. Suzette took an unabashed and lengthy look at her breasts, where they pushed against the filmy cotton. She slithered her gaze lower, to where Camellia was very aware of the slit in her drawers. Camellia quickly stepped into her pale pink morning dress and buttoned up its front. "Does he fuck you well, your Powell? Or shall I have a talk with him?" Camellia choked out a laugh, cheeks heating because she knew Suzette was serious. "He does well enough." "Well enough is not good enough," Suzette proclaimed firmly. "The only thing I miss about my husband is his ability to fuck me into next week." "Powell fucked me all the way to Paris," Camellia said smugly, then released an exasperated sigh and began searching for the pins in her hair. "Do you have any idea how much pleasure I derive from saying that word? I don't think I've said it once since leaving this country 10 years ago." "Fuck, chérie?" Suzette chided. "I have children," she reminded, "and very conservative parents, and in-laws who guard their reputation like the Hope Diamond. None of those people are you. Quit living your life by their rules. Say it. I'll do it." Camellia lowered onto the bench at the vanity table. Suzette passed her the postiche of false ringlets before she searched out the rest of her hairpins. "I miss this." Suzette reached for the hairbrush, then remained bent, wrapping her arms across Camelia's shoulders and pressing their cheeks together. As Suzette's breasts pressed into Camelia's upper back and her nose nuzzled into her neck, another rush of want accosted Camellia. It wasn't entirely sexual. It was tenderness and affection, and yearning for what they'd had, maybe yearning for youth. Camellia turned her head to look at her friend, nose to nose. She cupped Suzette's cheek and pressed the softest of kisses to her lips, wanting to linger, wanting this. Intimacy, without fear of losing herself. "I missed you, too," she said sincerely. "But I'm married now, and—" She gave a defeated little sigh and looked to all the meaningless baubles on her dressing table. "I've never wanted another woman, you know. You were the only one, and what you and I had was, I don't know, adolescent curiosity. Something that was an extension of our partnering as we learned to dance. One more rehearsal for the life we would lead. When I went home, we were both reconciled to marrying and being fulfilled by a man. Weren't we?" "Oui." Suzette straightened and gave a gentle squeeze on Camelia's shoulder. "I'm not trying to seduce you. I miss you as my bonne amie." A sting rose behind Camelia's eyes. She dropped her gaze, embarrassed. "I'm making assumptions." "No." Suzette lowered to sit on the bench beside her, but facing the other way. Their hips were snugged close. She looped her arm across Camelia's stomach. Their somber gazes held. "I do prefer women. I think I always did. And you are very alluring, Camellia." She rolled her eyes to the ceiling. "I'm fat. Plump. It suits you." Suzette hugged her a little tighter, every kind of love and acceptance in that embrace, then eased her hold to say ruefully, "But I can find a lover without breaking my heart over one who lives so far away and has so much to return to. I've stopped taking lovers, to be honest. They distract me from my work. But I miss this closeness." "Yes." Camellia hugged her arm across Suzette. "This is what I wish I could have with Powell. Talking openly and feeling loved for being myself." "You don't have petite distractions? My husband and I did." Her hand massaged Camelia's waist and hip. I don't think I could have understood such a thing until right this minute. Her heart was thumping in slow.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?